Well, good morning, everybody. It's good to be back here in the State House, which is, well, it was about 2 years ago we left, and so it's been a long 2 years. So this morning, I thought we would talk about the miscellaneous ag subjects that they're in the House bill, and just review that quickly, and then we'll switch to Dan. And in the task force report that we received, there was a short-term recommended fix from both FDR, and we acted on that, which was picking up the insurance premium for the farmers to get them signed up. And I believe that bill is, well, I know it's sitting on the governor's desk waiting for his signature, and hopefully if he does have a problem with the bill, I don't think it's that section. So it's, pretty apt to be part of the budget adjustment bill. But there's other parts in the task force report that we might be able to pick up a couple or three or a few things out of that report to add to the housekeeping bill. So I thought if we got started on that early enough, not that we're gonna wrap anything up, because we haven't got to worry about crossover stuff, because it's an H bill. And so I thought we might be able to pick something out of that task force report to add to the housekeeping bill that the House sent us. And they also have our housekeeping bill, or will have, over there. And so if there are things that they would like to do with it, we'll just coordinate that with Carolyn and go from there. So that was sort of the thinking behind what's on the schedule for today.
Okay.
I'm a little bit envy of you witnesses. You don't have to wear masks. Yeah, Pearson, put your mask on, Pearson.
Solidarity.
I'd rather be there with you guys, but here we are.
Yeah. So anyways, we'll get started first to run through the housekeeping bill. And I think, Gordon, you're gonna do that. So Michael he was supposed to do this, but believe it or not, Bray's way behind on his coyote bills and everything else. So Michael wanted to go there. So I recommended, Gordon, that you go there and be punished, and Michael could come and be with us. But anyway, thanks for filling in, Gordon, for Michael, and I would expect you want to use the screen.
Yeah. Let me see. Can you see the Word document now?
Yep.
Yeah.
Cool. Perfect. Great. So we can start. This change in section 1 is just removing the term principally, which is from the Agency of Ag. Essentially, they were concerned about this term principally would mean that only
I don't-
25% of products
Hey,
really
hey,
needed.
Gordon, this is Senator Parent. Can you make that a little bit bigger?
Yeah,
Maybe
yeah,
go to
yeah,
one
of course.
page.
Here you go. Is that better?
There we go.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good.
So the agency was just concerned that the term principally here would mean that the 50% is actually 50% of 50%. So it only require 25% of the products to be created on the farm or on the agricultural business. So removing that term principally is just really going to the intent that 50% of the product comes from the agricultural business. So yeah, any questions there, or do you want me to just keep like rolling through and then if you have questions, please interrupt.
Well, yeah, we'll, if we have a question, we'll ask it, Gordon.
I do have a question, just in terms of what that means around imports. If you import part of an ingredient and then you make banana bread or something, how do we deal with that? Can you just help me understand what this means?
So this is basically, the example the agency used in House Committee was cookies. So if you created right now with this language, if you created the flour for the cookie and that flour was only 25% of the cookie, then this is okay. But with changing that principally, then it would require, the oats to also be made on the farm to be put into that cookie rather than only, 25% of the product originating. So it needs to be grown on the farm for it to really apply. Am I answering your question or?
Well, you are, but since we're allowing processing, and ingredients would be coming from outside, but then being processed. So that's what I'm just trying to understand. I'm not quarreling here, but I just want to be clear of what I think what we're trying to do is say it's got to be mostly from things that you're growing on the farm. But it would seem to me that this language would allow you to bring food in and then process it and have that be considered on farm.
I don't think that would be allowed given the produced on the farm at which the business is located language later in the sentence. Reading that processing in the serial list in conjunction with that produced on the farm at which a business is located in how I read it is, they can process the wheat or the oats and that can still count towards it. But if you imported, raw grain and then processed it into flour, that wouldn't necessarily be qualifying because it wasn't produced on the farm. And I can definitely check in with agency staff to see if that rings true or.
Yeah, just because the trigger is that it's 50% of the total sales are from. Anyway, all right. Am I the only one that worries that this is not precise?
Well, I think with the 50% in there and to qualify, I know we can check that out though, Chris. I mean, why not?
Yeah, thanks.
Highlighted that.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm not sure myself. I hear what you're saying. I'm not sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I can check in with staff and get back to the committee, definitely.
yeah.
And moving on, just the general powers and kind of administration part of the housekeeping. So this is just allowing the agency to serve enforcement and other documents electronically. Right now, the statutes don't allow for the service by email or electronically. This permits the secretary. It doesn't order the secretary to do that, as long as they have proof of receipt, and that's done digitally. And it requires some amount of response as well, I believe, from the entity being served, to confirm that they did get the electronic service.
But
Great.
they have to get approval from the person that's being served. They have to agree to accept electronic mail, right?
I believe so. They can also, like, you don't necessarily need approval. If they respond to the email, that would be accepting the service through the electronic means. As like the final sentence here, the agreement to accept may be communicated through electronic mail and need not be signed. But they can have that previous agreement to be able to be served electronically.
What if someone doesn't want to be served electronically?
Then, the continued paper service is still available to the secretary. This was just, from the agency staff, when they're serving a lot of these things, it's just sometimes easier for both parties to just do this electronically and increase the efficiencies. So it doesn't mandate electronic service, it just permits the secretary to do so.
Thank you.
Yeah, the only problem I can see with this, the only quick thing I see with it is some places have very poor service. And, the agency could think that they're sending it electronically, but the individual receiving that notice has no means to collect it. I don't know, it might be a little early, but.
Well, it also seems that somebody could get an electronic survey and ignore it and just say, I never got it. There's it seems like they should have to respond within a certain amount of time or something.
Yeah, we may have to change that to some degree. To take care of the individuals that, and most farms are in rural areas, and that rural areas is where we have the most difficult time with cell service. So we may have to change that to some degree as we move forward. Yeah.
So would you, for that, would you be interested in adding, a certain amount of time, if there's no response from the party being served, then move to the other formal paper service process?
Yeah, we should, we'll think about what to put in there and you can too, Gordon, and we'll figure out some way to.
Well, the part that I think about, I'm not saying it happens, but if you have a good lawyer and if you don't respond to an electronic thing, you got more days, and then they have to go through the other process. You just delayed the whole process by whatever days you say. Because if I was, or theoretically, if you were someone who was in trouble needing to get served, and you got the electronic thing, and then well, I got 20 days not to respond, and then they'll stop. So then I'm going to extend this window as long as possible. So that's just something to flag if.
Yeah, most of those notices, they aren't they aren't standing out by the mailbox waiting for the mailman to come with it. So anyways, we'll have to think about how to correct that.
Okay. Great.
Now, has the house made any changes? Did they add this language or change it in any way?
I'm not certain on if they changed this language at all from the agency. But this is passed by the House.
Yeah.
But
Yep.
yeah. So this is section 3 is looking at the license application and just making sure that there aren't any either pending or past violations for the same license type on an individual before they can be granted a license. So essentially, it's just making sure that an entity that's applying for a license isn't already violating another license that they have. At its like most basic terms. And I can zoom out a little bit if you guys want to read the text. And any questions or concerns on this section?
If you could outline, Gordon, the difference between what's currently in place. I mean, I would think that this is already sort of going on.
So the agency requested this because they don't necessarily have the system in place to do this, where they might issue a license or a permit and there's a pending violation. If they are fully in violation of something, then the agency can look at that. But if there's a pending violation, then that's something that the agency can't necessarily look at right now. So they've requested this authority so they can make sure that licensed individual is actually following the requirements of that license.
Yeah. Yeah, you'd think they would have a system already in place to handle that.
Yeah. I mean, if you get pulled over on the interstate for speeding, the law enforcement official has the ability, I think, right there in the car to look up when your last ticket was or any sort of violations of the law of the road. I'm confused why the agency doesn't have a similar ability. I guess I'm not against them being able to do it. I just would have assumed that they already could.
See, we'll have that or somebody come in from.
Yeah.
I can definitely ask agency staff to like clarify on that process if you'd like me to.
Yep.
Now, produce inspection, this is changing or adding the definition adulterated to the definition section. And just wait 1 second. Sorry. Yeah, and it's just clarifying the meaning of farm comes from the federal regulations rather than a state regulation to bring it in conjunction with the FSMA Food Safety Modernization Act language, because this is about produce inspection. Yeah. I'm sorry, I'm not super, I don't have the section by section up in front of me right now, but I can get the intention behind this. I can't recall it right now off the top of my head, but yeah, I can send that in or after our break, refresh my recollection of the intent behind this.
Mr. Chair,
Yeah,
just a question for Gordon. When we, I should know this, but when we cite federal statute, like you've done here in the new 3, does that have an implied timestamp? Like if Congress changes that, next year, does our statute move with the new definition, or do you see my question?
yeah,
Yeah, I think the intent here is for it to move, because this is the state component of the Federal Food Safety Modernization Act, so that we can be in line with FSMA. So I think that intent is for it to change as the federal government changes it, because, especially in this context, because it is a federal program that the state is going to be participating in and enforcing. Consent. Sorry, just making a note for myself.
I think, see, our ag agencies already follows these guidelines, and that's why a year or 2 or 3 ago, we put a lot of washing stations in and help cover the cost of those for produce producers, so they could wash their vegetables certain number of times and all that. So this is something else they're trying to add to all this.
I believe so, and I can double check the intent behind this one. It's not coming to mind immediately right now, but I'll get back to you after break.
Yeah.
And then, authority to adopt rules. Again, this is just to be brought in line with the FSMA regulations, adding language to just explicitly call out FSMA and the statutory framework that it's creating. And then again, apply the definitions here, bringing in conjunction with the FSMA regulations and law. And then section 6, again, for produce inspection, it's for looking to enhance the secretary's ability to inspect for compliance with those FSMA regulations. So yeah, a lot of this is just to make sure that the state is following the federal statutes and guidelines when it comes to operating a FSMA program. Any questions on these?
Are you going to be talking with somebody over there, Gordon?
At the USDA FSMA?
Yeah, you're going to be talking with somebody at the ag agency, checking out different issues. Because it would be good to see. I mean, we sell a tremendous amount of produce already, and many of our farms are already selling to some of the larger stores in Vermont. And it would be nice just to know for us, I think, what the difference is between how we're doing that presently and how many other restrictions or corrections they would be made to our present law to meet the federal law.
Can you?
As far as I know, from what I've heard, they're all getting along pretty well, and people buy a lot of the locally grown products that are, that are produced on our farms. So, and the other issue is if there are restrictions on moving these products across state lines, will this help in that case so that we could increase shipping products to, say, southern New England, if need be?
So just to be clear, your question is, asking if these changes will allow Vermont producers to participate more in the interstate market?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, I can definitely ask that question.
And Gordon, I noticed in subdivision 2, there's a phrase in order to, but it's not underlined, it's dotted. Is that, what does that mean?
This is just Microsoft Word saying that should be to. The more concise language would be clearer. But legally speaking, like in order to is the correct phrase to make sure that that's actually communicated. So that's just like a Microsoft Word function, not necessarily a product of our editing office.
Yeah, I've never seen it in a bill before, that's all.
Yeah. No, thanks for your question. Definitely. Any other questions when it comes to the inspections?
Well,
No.
Mosquito control. This is just changing some language when it comes to the control districts and only allowing in-kind larvicide services rather than adulticide application. And that's due to some ongoing litigation with the agency and the agency's increasing preference for larvicide, which is a non-pesticide application, whereas the adulticide is a pesticide application. So that's just the agency really trying to incentivize the larvicide and favor larvicide.
Gordon, do you know if the House took testimony from the, I don't remember the name of it, but there's a mosquito district down by my way in Rutland County? I'm hearing from them they don't like this.
Sorry, could you repeat the last bit of your question?
Sure. It's a Brandon Lester mosquito control district, I think. I probably have the towns mixed up. But I've had a couple of emails from folks that are on that district board that do not like this language.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know if the House took testimony from them?
There was a member of the House that offered testimony on this subject, communicating some of their constituents' concerns about that language. And I can look back on that testimony and send it over to the committee if you would like.
That would be helpful for me at least, yeah.
Yeah, because they were on the news again this weekend or something about spraying down there in Dunmore. Is it?
Yeah.
Dunmore?
That's the area I'm talking about, yeah.
Yeah.
And they must still be using the adulticide applications.
Do you know the difference between them, Guy?
The
One of them has
adulticide,
chemicals in it.
yeah, the larvicide is like a naturally occurring what is it? Parasite, I believe, or a bacteria that attacks and infects the larva, whereas the adulticide is a pesticide that's air applicated. And sorry if the my audio is a little noisy and choppy, and if it becomes an issue, please let me know and I can move to a different spot or come into the committee room.
No, we can hear you fine.
No, it's going good.
Great, yeah, so I can send over that testimony from a member of the House, kind of
Yeah.
raising those concerns, Senator Collmore, and
Thank you.
moving on to the hemp sections. This is really a clerical change. I mean, just removing the industrial from industrial hemp. I mean, that's really just to bring in line with the new federal regulations that are coming out on the regulation of hemp, and just bringing in line with that language. So there's that change, and then just making sure that it can be considered an agricultural product, which has already been done by this committee and the General Assembly. And then also due to that increased federal regulation of hemp, there's a federal regulatory system now. So the state secretary is simply asking to change that. The current language, which is shall establish and administer a program, to may establish, so the secretary can then utilize the federal system of regulation.
So, are you adding shall or may, or
We're
or may?
eliminating shall and replacing it with may.
And so Gordon, if the secretary decides not to do that, it would default to the federal system?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Pierce.
Yeah, there seems to be, we had testimony on another bill that also was sort of referencing the federal program. And it seems that we have shifted from a state pilot program to the federal setup. And that sort of catches me a bit by surprise. Committee, is that, did I just miss something? Or Gordon, do you know if we've sort of made that a deliberate decision, or we're just time ran out on the pilot, or do you have any of those details? Or maybe we would just flag that to learn down the road.
My understanding right now is that a lot of the federal regulations are in line with what the state was doing originally, but I can definitely research that and get that reasoning for the committee.
So would it be accurate to say that the feds moved in our direction and thus not, we don't need to be as concerned with having a separate pilot program?
That's my understanding right now, but again, I definitely will check in with agency staff to make sure that that understanding is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, the other issue with this, and Chris, you may want to weigh in on this. You know how the new cannabis laws are pushing to have small growers, and how we wanted small farm operators. We wanted to be sure to call this an ag product so that small farms could take advantage of the taxing situations and all this that farmers have we don't want we want to make sure that we don't set a precedent by fooling with this hemp stuff
Right.
that would alter that when we get to that point either.
Yeah, I believe that hemp is comfortably in the ag space as opposed to cannabis, which is not. So we did hear that when we were trying to sort through that other S281, I think it was. But it's a good
Yeah.
thing for us to keep an eye on because it's one of those fairly small, innocent sounding changes that could have real impact.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll check in with the agency to get clarification on the real intent behind that change. And again, to bring in line with that previous change from shall to may, the rulemaking authority for the hemp program has also changed from shall to may and eliminates the term industrial from industrial hemp.
Yeah.
Now, the kind of the biggest substantive change in the hemp area is this enforcement of non-conforming hemp product. Right now, it's a pretty detailed process of what can and can't happen with a hemp product that has a higher delta 9 THC concentration than is permitted by the federal regulations. And this is trying to simplify that process. And especially now that there's a legalized cannabis market, bring that out of compliance hemp into that market through extracting that delta 9 THC, which would then bring the hemp back into compliance with the hemp program. So it's essentially just arranging for the disposal, remediation, or destruction, as long as it's consistent with both the state and the federal laws. So it's just really trying to simplify that process and the language that surrounds it.
So it allows for that to be, as long as they can come into compliance with the rate, the percentage of THC, it wouldn't have to be destroyed. Is that?
Exactly. That still is an option, but it's no longer like the option.
What exactly is remediation? To me, if a plant has a delta 9 level that's at a certain point, how do you remediate that?
So you can extract that delta 9 THC through solvents, be it carbon dioxide or butane or some other solvent that can actually strip the delta 9 from the plant, but then leave some of the other cannabinoids intact. And yeah, this is what my dad actually does for work over in Maine. So I'm relatively familiar with the process. But yeah, so it's essentially remediating to that delta 9 concentration through stripping it from the plant.
Gotcha.
So your dad, his job is to figure out how to do that.
Part of it, yeah, and then he also works with just growers to take all of the CBDs and everything as well. So
yeah,
it's a very technical process, which is surprising. Great.
Are we allowing that by having mediation in there? Is that what's okaying that process?
Yes, and then also, making sure that to remediate so that it is consistent with applicable state and federal law. So it can bring that out of compliance hemp product back into compliance.
And Gordon, what's the difference between disposal and destruction? To me, they're pretty close. If you dispose of something, you throw it away. If you destruct it, I guess I don't know what you do, you light it on fire?
Yeah, I'm not sure on the exact, I can speak with the agency staff to see, because I mean, off the first reading, I kind of agree that disposal and destruction might be very similar. But yeah, I'll check with agency staff on that.
Thank you.
And I'm wondering if that was rewritten so that you would, if you're over, then you would, I'd like to see the disposal down at the end of the sentence instead of right at the heading of the sentence. Because it sounds, does that sound like it would give the agency more authority with that disposal right at the beginning? So why wouldn't you arrange for the remediation? You know, try to fix the crop first, and then if none of that works, then the secretary could order it, the destruction of the hemp crop and take that disposal right out of there. But that's something we can work on as we move forward.
Yeah, no, I mean, changing the order would
Yeah.
communicate that hierarchy if that's your intent.
Yeah, it makes sense to me.
Does that make?
Yep.
Yeah. Then as part of this, the stop sale order. So if a crop is found to be in non-compliance because of its high levels of delta-9 THC, stop sale order is issued to that business. And then this language is just adding some context on what needs to be included in that order, because right now there was no required content of that order. It can just be like a stop sale order, whereas now it's or this language would change it to describe the crops, the issues with the crops, and then instructions on how to come into compliance with that stop sale order, or remedy the basis. And then also creates a appeals process for that stop sale order.
And does that mean when it says by serving a letter that the person would mail it to the secretary? We just up top, we've allowed the electronic communication to happen. It would seem like, I don't know, if I wanted to appeal something, I'd want it to happen as fast as I could.
Yeah, I'll see if that's mandating confirmed mail service or if it allows some amount of online portal.
Yep.
When did the house did any changes to any of this?
And
Don't know.
this final change is just repealing the interstate commerce language because now that it is a federally regulated crop, the dormant commerce clause is no longer an issue, and the interstate commerce of hemp is permitted by the federal government. So there's no real need for this language anymore. And now for the water quality and permitting certification. This is changing the medium farm permit. It's just adding this language for farms that have never been permitted under the prior permit term. This is just reducing the amount of work that the agency necessarily needs to do because now they can kind of look at previous permits with this language. But if it's a new farm, then they have to go through the complete rigorous process.
Well, medium-sized farms have had to have permits for quite a while, so
Yeah.
the small farms now they're trying to, I think, trying to get permitted.
Yeah, I'm not understanding what the difference is between present practice and what this would allow. This is just for medium farms, Gordon, right?
Yes, correct. Yep. So this would essentially it changes the process for farms that are already currently have medium farm permit. Then that makes it easier to continue to keep that permit. But then when it comes to new medium farms seeking permit, then it's a different process. And I can double check that my understanding on this is correct, and I'll get back to the committee because I don't want to offer legal advice when it's wrong, right? So I can definitely double check that that's the real meaning of this added clause and get back to you by the end of the day.
It would seem to imply to me that there's the creation of a brand new medium farm, and I don't know how many of those we get every year. In other words, even if a farm got sold to somebody else, the permit would follow the farm, I would think, unless they dramatically change the farm. So how many medium farms just sort of all of a sudden come into existence and need a permit? That's what I'm trying to wrestle with.
Yeah, we can check that out and get those numbers. Because I actually thought we'd lost one medium-sized farm and we hadn't gained any, but
I think you're right, Bob.
maybe I'm wrong.
Okay, yeah, I'll look into that.
Yeah.
And then section 10 is looking at the small farm certification, and it's just repealing this require of notice of change of ownership and lease for that permit.
So there's no requirement if you sell a small farm to somebody else. Is that what I'm getting out of that?
Yeah, they're no longer required to submit a notice to the Secretary of Agriculture that they've sold the farm or changed.
I can't imagine that ever being a law that If you sold your small farm, you had to notify. I mean, I would think if they're milk producing small farm, you know, they'd have to notify ag to get the milk going in somebody else's name and,
Yep.
you know, sign up for current use. They'd have to notify the current use board and. Yep.
This is, I believe this is the composts, the like chicken composts bill. So making sure that small farms that can operate in that chicken composting program don't have to be permitted small farms, because a permitted small farm is still relatively big in comparison to the very small farms that we have in Vermont. So this is just allowing small farms that are subject to the RAPs, but not required to be permitted to participate in the composting program. And I can double check that is where this is coming from, but.
I can't imagine.
Mr. Chair, can I ask-
Chris?
Yeah, Gordon, I think when we did the chicken and compost stuff, we asserted that the compost could only be something like 50% of the farm's income. We were trying to make sure that someone didn't kind of have it be basically a compost business that they pretended was a farm. And so I'm curious if that was considered in this, if you have any sense or could look it up, because yes, they're are really small farms. I can't remember kind of what we call them, are quite small, but the amount of compost that we allowed to be gathered was not trifle. And so I just would like to make sure that somebody's thought through that the relationship there.
Yeah,
Right? Am I right that we said something like can't be more than 50% of your business or something like that?
No.
Maybe,
you had to utilize 50% of it
Yeah.
on your own land or something.
yeah, there was something like that. Maybe that's it, but which still, you know, would have some volumetric relationship to this to what we're looking at here.
Yeah, I can definitely check in on the testimony that was offered to the House on this stuff and see if that was discussed at all. And if not, you know, ask agency staff if they've thought about this at all.
Yeah.
And then the effective date is the last section, which is my birthday, which is fun. So yeah, that's the walkthrough. Of any, I know that you were hoping to look at the dairy task force as well. Do you have any other like questions for me? I know Dan is going to be much more helpful when it comes to the dairy task force information than I am. So I'll still be here taking notes, but I probably won't participate very actively in that conversation.
Yeah, what we had in mind, Gordon, is we're gonna ask Dan to run through some of the suggestions that the task force move forward. And eventually, we would have you or Michael, if we decided to adopt some of them, we'd add them to this bill we just went through. But we wanted to hear from Dan what they are, you know, refresh our memory of the proposals that the task force moved forward with. And so it'd be good for you to listen to the presentation and discussion. So thanks for hanging with us, and thanks for your presentation early.
Thanks for not laughing.
No, you did well, Gordon. So anyway, good morning, Dan, I don't know if you sat through the agency's stuff or not that we just went through with Gordon, but what we were thinking, or I was thinking, is that we would run through some of the projects and proposals that the task force came up with, and maybe pick some of those out to move forward with, and we would add that to this bill if we needed to do something in legislation.
Understood, Bobby, and what I did, I'm gonna try to share my screen. I did a one-page. Linda, is it possible to let me put a document up, or is that not possible?
It's now possible.
Not possible.
No,
Should it-
yes, it is now possible.
Oh,
Go
now,
ahead.
I have to say, I am remote from you, more remote than in the previous setup of the Zoom, and it's a little hard to hear. I did sit and hear what Gordon was saying, and it's a little bit hard to hear.
Huh. I know you can't see us very well, can you, in the screen?
I can see you fine. It's just, it's like I said before, it's a bit of a bird's eye view. I'm quite a bit up in the air. And I've turned my volume up. If I'm speaking too loud, I apologize. I'll try to modulate.
No, you're fine.
No, we can hear you fine. It just, looking at our screen from our point of view, I mean, it looks like I'm out way off.
You're playing center field.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's a very good analogy, actually. That's kind of the remote feeling that I have. I'm kibitzing because I'm not very good at this. And I'm not, it should come up, but I did rehearse this morning.
I just hope that stack of books or whatever it is off to the side doesn't collapse on you.
That's, if you have an architect for a wife, that's what your bookcase looks like. I'm afraid I'm not going to be able to pull the document up.
You want me to do that?
No, because I have it. Maybe I'll send it to you, and then let's see if I can do that.
Oh, I see. It's your separate document.
Here comes my IT to the rescue. Bear with me one more second, you guys. Okay,
Sure.
the document didn't come up.
So here, where is your document on your,
That's it.
okay. So just,
There it is.
Yeah.
there you go. You got a good IT person working for
hi, Bobby.
you.
Thanks, Fleur. Does that work for everybody? Okay, so at the front of the task force report, Mike put in basically a 2-page executive summary of the recommendations, and I went through and made that into 1 page of just kind of topic sentences. So what I thought might be helpful is to just briefly run through the list, and then I at Bobby's request, I kind of culled out a couple that I thought you might think about for next steps. Just for a little bit of background, the task force recommendations are kind of a marriage of trying to address the biggest problems that we heard from across the community. We heard from processors as well as farmers, and then the stakeholders and academics and the like. And so we heard a cross section of views, and what we asked them for is, what are the challenges that farmers face on a structural level, and then how have those problems been compounded by the pandemic? And then in the middle of our work, as I tried to make clear in my prior presentation, all of the federal money became available. And so the task force function morphed a little bit into trying to marry the problems that we heard with the funding that was available. So that's kind of the backdrop for the list of proposals that we came up with. Then we had sort of categories that are in bold of how to address things, not so much with regard to the money, but just categorization. So risk management, big issue, was probably the most direct proposal that came out of the DFR report. Then the chronic problem of price, number two. Then picking up more on the testimony that we heard, I'd say the next three really issues of aging infrastructure on farms, challenges with milk transportation, challenges with labor, and chronic problem with purchasing at the state level, and then really G is the issue of new capacity in the state, and then the other question of succession planning and sharpening up the business assistance that's available to farmers. So those were sort of the big categories that we came up with. Then, as Bobby said, we were presented with this really short-term potential real benefit to dairy farmers, which was to take up the dairy margin coverage premium issue and see if the state would be willing to pick up the premium so that the farmers could eliminate the issue of risk of their own funding in deciding whether to enroll in the program. And I commend your committee for really your prompt action on that. I obviously the testimonies indicated this year is not necessarily the year when this might become at issue. However, with all the uncertainty, what I'm hearing talking to farmers is nobody knows what's going to happen to their feed costs. So even though the milk price is up, the feed cost, particularly with the cost of fuel, is the grand unknown. So hopefully farmers will pick up on the opportunity that's been presented to themselves, and at no risk they can get into this program. I don't know if you've tracked the numbers at all, but the numbers for last year, the program paid almost $60,000 a farm on average in Vermont, which is a substantial chunk of change. $27 million to the state 1 year. That's what the program returned. It's a little hard to track how that translates to per hundredweight because the data doesn't give us between tier 1 and tier 2, tier 1 being up to 5 million pounds and tier 2 being over 5 million pounds. But it's somewhere between $1 and $3 a hundredweight. So it's real substantial money. And if the feed price moves in a big way this year, then the program could really be of import to farmers. So, hats off to you folks for getting that done. As I said, what I try to do is suggest a couple of next steps, and they really relate to price, so the state assistance for farmer participation in risk management, there's an additional federal insurance program that I want to talk about a little bit. Senator Brock's suggestion on establishing a fee for packaged milk for advertising, that seems like the proverbial potentially low-hanging fruit of a basic idea. And then a little bit broader, and I think requires some additional work, is to get into the issue of infrastructure. And I highlight that, and really it's the aging infrastructure and somewhat outdated for milk pickup, and a bunch of issues there. And I highlight that. I think that's where you really ought to put your attention right off, based on the testimony that we heard, that this is a real issue for maintaining our farm base. Bobby's raised the point repeatedly about the need to help with the availability of the money by making greater, increasing the capacity of the grant writing capability of farmers, and an ombudsperson in the same line. And then my last thought is to get into the in the shorter term. Obviously, it's a big list we got here. Two more things. One is that we have issues, developing issues, real problematic issues with milk pickup and off the farm, and then labor. So just labor, milk pickup, and going up the other way, infrastructure and transportation. It's getting the milk off the farm. Those are in the same category. The program is the Dairy Revenue Protection Program, which I'll talk about in a minute. And last, whether the legislature wants to put we debated about calling it a fee. It's really a tax. It amounts to a tax on the retail sale of packaged milk products, to create a dedicated fund, in essence, to promote advertising. So that's the sort of the summary answer to Bobby's questions. Those are the items that I picked out from our list that I would recommend that your committee focus for next steps. So if anybody has any questions on, or thoughts, additional thoughts you might have had looking through this summary list, we could have that discussion. Otherwise, Bobby, if you like, I can move into a little bit more detail on each of those.
Well, yeah, the retail tax on the sale of milk would, I don't know how well, the only way that would be feasible, as far as I can see, with what's happened in the grocery stores, is milk in most stores up north anyways, they're selling per gallon from $4.69 to $4.90. And the only way you could do that is to put it on right at the bottling plant. So if you could put a small fee on the person that's doing the packaging, it wouldn't show up in the, it wouldn't show up in the store. Say if you did, I don't know, did we ever hear, what did Senator Brock talk about for a percentage? It was pretty small, wasn't it?
My recollection, he was talking a nickel. That's my recollection.
Yeah, like a gallon, right?
Yeah.
So instead of $4.69, it'd be $4.74, but it would be captured at the facility where the milk was processed. What about, like I was at Walmart last week one day and seemed like they had milk in there from way off.
Well, you know, you're getting into the specifics of, does anybody have any other, you know, going through the list, we can kind of pick at each of the suggestions in more detail, but I just wondered if anybody wants to add anything else to or review any of the others before we did that. If anybody had any thoughts on.
Brian has a question.
Yeah, I'm curious, Dan, what other alternatives would there be for shifting the costs in the transportation arena? Who's gonna pick that up?
Yeah, so that's one that's on my list. So I'll get into that in more detail too. So
Okay.
maybe I just,
So why don't we go through your list and in details, a little more detail there?
okay. So that I would start with what Brian asked and get to the tax issue a little bit later, if that's all right, Bobby, or do you want to start with the tax?
Oh, no, that's fine.
Okay, so I would put together the issue of transportation and infrastructure kind of together. The challenge that farms are facing is with the reduction in availability of hauling. It's put a lot of pressure on the loading and delivery of milk off the farm. So it kind of indirectly to your answer to your question, Brian, the first up issue is bulk tanks. So it's not necessarily just a shifting the cost of the hauling itself. It's the whole kind of assembly of milk and hauling, and which makes it the problem potentially more addressable than to just look at it the way your question was framed. So
Yep.
so I think in straightforward terms, farmers have come to rely on if you increase your milk production and you start to create pressure on the size of your bulk tank, that the co-ops in the past have responded by making available everyday pickup instead of every other day pickup. But now that's becoming less possible, and really to the point of not possible in some situations. And I think it's it's a compounding problem where you had 5 farms on a road. You were going to assemble a load, and without a whole lot of mileage on the truck or time to the driver to be able to assemble a single load. But with fewer farms to assemble a load, you're having to travel more distance and take more time. So it's a real compounding problem of the loss of dairy farms. And so the discussion has headed in the direction of farmers needing larger bulk tanks so that they can go back to every other day pickup. And it's a question of who's going to absorb that initial cost. So that's the shift right there, Brian, number one. Then there has been some greater availability of maintaining milk quality, milk cooling. There are a number of technologies available for keeping milk cool less expensively. And I'm not sure, we kind of heard that there seems to be uneven availability of those technologies to farms. So I would think that that's an issue that we need more information about. I don't think the information is too hard to find, just a question of gaining access to that. So that's the second issue. And then the third issue we heard about, and we did hear more testimony about this, is that driveways on some farms, and more, I think, than many thought, are becoming problematic. That getting the truck to the milk house is becoming an issue as the transportation, and Bobby can speak to this far better than I, but as the trucks have moved to larger uh, uh, trailers and tractors, that the ability to back up to the milk house become problems. So, and getting maybe even going up the driveway is a problem. So whether the state can assist, identify and assist those farms with updating their driveways, increasing their bulk tanks, and improving milk temperature, that would take some of the shift of the cost from the farm to the state. So really, I think that's the what is available for direct action by the state. And then the second bucket is what is available for federal funding to do that. So that would be my suggestion for you. You can gather some evidence on those three starting issues, and Bobby, chime in if you see others, but driveways, bulk tanks, cooling, number one,
Yeah,
availability of federal funding, number two, need for a match by the state, and then you have a starting program to address both infrastructure and the transportation issue without even getting into the larger question of federal highways and the rest of it, or even CDLs for that matter.
well, those issues are, those are mostly federal issues, because we do allow permitting up to close to 100,000 pounds on our roads. And CDLs, we do have Department of Labor puts on even some free CDL courses to get people to go. The big issue there is drivers that just go get a CDL. Trucking companies can't hire them because they don't have any previous experience. So the insurance companies won't take them anyways. They have to get jobs driving a dump truck or, something to get used to these bigger rigs and bigger loads. So, yeah, I think, what we just went over is much more important to try to get done than fooling with that stuff that's, like the CDLs and the road limits and that stuff.
The good news, if I can, I think anyway, you're talking about bulk tanks and driveways, those to me are one-time expenditures,
Yeah.
which would fall under that one-time money that's available from the feds. So I see that as a very positive kind of thing. It doesn't develop a program which is going to have to be sustained down the road.
Yeah.
You get a new bulk tank, you got a new bulk tank. You don't have to do anything after that. I'm just, and Bobby, you could certainly talk to this from your years in the transportation business. I mean, we're talking diesel fuel for the most part here, and I don't see any end in sight with prices increasing almost daily lately. I mean, I went away last week to Florida, and when I came back, it's 50 cents more than when I left. I mean, so I don't think that's going to go away. And if I ran a trucking company, I'd want to figure out a way to get some of that back.
Well,
I mean, you can't run a company and lose money.
no. And if you could cut down the trips.
Right.
And do the same work, it would be the smart thing to do.
Yeah.
So I think, to follow up on what you said, Brian, about this one time, it's a key point. We've always been compelled to look at where there are capital expenditures. You either have to get the money out of the bank, or you have to get the money, either way, you have to get the money out of your milk check, right? Whereas this time around, there's a funding source that if we can figure out how to use, then you seize the opportunity for a one-time improvement. That's where we are, and I think we're on the right track, because state of Maine just adopted a comprehensive bill for the expenditure of their federal funding, and it's called the Agriculture Infrastructure Investment. Excuse me, a subset of the Maine program for expending their federal money. They came up with what they're calling the Agricultural Infrastructure Investment Program. So, and it tracks along the lines of what we're talking about here. They've put up $20 million of their federal funding. So I would encourage you to take a look at that in the backdrop of this. But I think we're on the right track for just the reason you said, Brian. So one time, yeah.
Dan, could I jump in, Mr. Chair?
Sure.
Dan, I'm curious if, the prospect of getting the milk truck to the tank is a tricky one as trucks are getting bigger. Has there ever been a strategy where people have some method of not requiring the truck to get all the way up there? So just some kind of hose or system that would make it easier to access, sort of without getting the truck all the way up to the barn?
Yeah, I defer to Bobby on this one. We've talked about this, not just in terms of recent options, but historically so I defer to Bobby for that.
Yeah, I don't know I would say the longest hose I've ever seen on a pickup truck, a bulk pickup truck is maybe 30 feet long. So, because that hose has to be, cleaned and they usually have as short a hose as possible. In like this time of year, I could see it maybe not being a big problem, but you're taking the summer on 85, 90 degree days, and that you don't get every drop out of that hose in between farms. You could possibly pick up some bacteria.
Yeah, I guess I was not thinking of the truck so much as some kind of farm infrastructure that moved the milk, closer to the road, and then could be presumably flushed. I mean, it would have challenges in the dead of winter and then the heart of summer probably, but I was just curious if that's ever done or been tried.
My suggestion to you, Chris, would be that we're really in the technology space here, and we're in a moment in time with resources available to try to push the technology capability. I mean, I have an old hill farm that I bought, and over the years, I've done this and that. And one of the things I came up with was to identify where the spot was where they kept the cans. When they were picking up milk cans, it's right next to the road. They dug out a box and put in a heavy duty concrete holding spot for the tanks. There's a water, you can see what they did, and the thinking is quite transparent, and I would think if you took some testimony, certainly some people have thought this through from a whole bunch of different angles about how best to address the current situation and circumstance, that different farms have. I mean, obviously bigger farms have gone to single load loading and hauling, testing right on the one time, it's all integrated into one. So whether that's adaptable to smaller farms, there's a number of issues. But with the money being available, to Brian's point, it's not a theoretical discussion. So, it's quite compelling for that reason.
Yeah, we could run
One other thought, Bobby, you and I have talked about is the role that Efficiency Vermont might be able to play in this. And so I would just add that to whether some of this is just straightforward energy efficiency that we're talking about. So it's not just federal infrastructure money in one category. There's also potentially energy efficiency funding and expertise that the state has to address the problem as well.
Well, a lot of times if you upgraded the bulk tank, you would have a plate cooler type cooling system that would cool the milk instantly and go into the insulated cool bulk tank. Whereas the old bulk tanks, you put the milk in warm and then it cooled itself within the tank. You know, there's a lot of efficiencies here. Plus, if you're running a truck for everyday pickup and you could switch that to every other day, that means you're doubling the efficiency of that vehicle. And if you're doing that, they're $200,000 unit. So if you can increase the efficiency of that vehicle, you saved a lot of money. And if you can't run it the second day and you don't even run it at all, well, you're cutting down on air pollution and all that from the wasted diesel fuel of chasing around picking this product up. So it's any way you go to do this every day, every other day pickup, it's more efficient for everything, you know.
I guess my last thought on this one, it would just be to aim back to Maine. Their agency website or department website has a link to their program, and they've thought through a lot of the issues involved. So I think that could be a pretty good starting point. It's called the Agriculture Infrastructure Investment Program.
Mr. Chair, could we ask Gordon to look at that proposal in Maine and give us some highlights from it? Would that be an appropriate ask for him?
Yeah, I was gonna have Linda try to find it, but no, legislative council could find that real easy, I would think. And bring it to a meeting. And yeah, are you on there, Gordon?
Yep, I'm still here.
Yeah, is that something you could do? And did you get the name of that Maine bill?
Could you repeat the name of it?
Yeah, it's the Agricultural Infrastructure Investment Program, AIIP.
Yeah, I can definitely pull that and send it over to Linda. That works.
Yeah.
So I move on to the next idea, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So up it's in blue there there are the dairy margin coverage program is really a risk mitigation strategy. So if dairy margin coverage was structured so that if the milk price moves down basically while the feed price moves up, the margin between the two starts to get squeezed, and so farmers can now get a payment of when that margin is problematic. The government is coming in to make a direct payment. So it's mitigating the risk that's involved with really the feed price as an input. But it's not really a hedge so much against the milk price. It's a hedge against the feed price. So the government, I'm gonna guess 5 years ago, put together a program that's really, it's kind of a sleeper program. You don't hear that much about it unless you dig into it, but it's more of a true hedge program against their pay price. And that program is called the Dairy revenue protection program. So as opposed to margin, we're talking about revenue, so your income. So dairy revenue protection program is administered through Farm Credit. They've got essentially a separate, I don't know if you call it a division or a department, but each of the Farm Credit offices have a staff that's available to assist farms with deciding and enrolling and participating in the dairy revenue protection program. The revenue protection program for farming has been around for a lot longer. The dairy element of it is relatively new. And so just a little bit of backdrop, I would highlight that the federal government has not offered really direct payments to farmers in dairy until the compact went out of business. There never really was a payment program, or very, very minimal, that served as a stand-in for the milk price. Instead, the program had the comprehensive federal milk market order program, which regulates the pay price, establishes a minimum price that farmers get paid in the marketplace. So it's a regulatory mechanism like our utility system, where our electric bills are overseen through regulation. Similarly, the milk price that farmers get paid is overseen through regulation. Whereas if you think about crops, wheat, soy, have always had subsidies built into the federal program. So after the compact went out, Congress passed the Milk Income Loss Contract Program, MILC. The MILC program was enacted when the compact was repealed. And what the MILC was really the first ever subsidy program that the federal government came up with. And we're talking literally 20 years ago now. So it's really 20 years of history with subsidies and payments to farmers. And MILC basically took the compact price, which was $16.94 on the class one. And when the class one went below $16.94, the federal government made up the difference between $16.94 and whatever the blend is, whatever the class one price was, at 45%, which was our utilization. So if the class one was $15.94, then the government paid 45% of that dollar on all the milk across the country. And it's ancient history now, but it's quite a startling number that I believe it was 2003, the government paid out $1.8 billion in 1 year to dairy farmers across the country. Last year, as I said before, the dairy margin coverage program was $60,000 a farm, but the net outlay was only $1.2 billion. So MILC was a big, heavy hit of money in its time. And it was really a new entry to federal policy. So I'm going into the weeds for two reasons. One, substantial amount of money is involved in this, is now in the Farm Bill. We're talking billions of dollars for dairy margin coverage. But the second thing that I want to highlight is that in contrast to the MILC program, which paid across the board, all of the milk production in the country received the payment out of MILC. Dairy margin coverage is now structured more towards smaller farms. With the tier 1 and tier 2 pricing mechanism, there's a new element of the federal government making a distinction between payments to smaller farms and payments to bigger farms. And the consequence of that is to reduce the cost. And that's a very important consideration when we think about how Vermont fits in, because we're on the smaller scale, but we don't cost the government that much money. So as I said, the program paid Vermont something on the order of $27 million. DMC paid something on the order of $27 million last year. Wisconsin got $200 million last year. And California got, I think, far less than Wisconsin. I can say that with some certainty. So there is the capability to structure a hedge program for smaller farms like are primarily in Vermont without it being a tremendous burden on the budget. So that's kind of the backdrop here. So what the and in the backdrop, the Dairy Revenue Protection Program has been around for a couple of years, but has not been used very much at all by dairy farms. As best I can figure, there are only something on the order of 30 to 50 of the roughly 500 farms in the state have signed up for the Dairy Revenue Protection Program, as compared to DMC, 75% of the farms signed up last year. So I tried to figure out whether it's awareness, and it's not clear. So what I'm suggesting to, number one, to the committee is that you ought to dig in deeper into this program, Dairy Revenue Protection Program, how it works, and how it's structured right now, and what it's in its current profile, what its cost might be to the state if there was greater participation. And I think we'll find that there's quite a bit of room to maneuver in making this program more available and more effective. As Bobby knows, I made one run with Farm Credit to try to take the knowledge base of this along to the point similar to what we did with dairy margin coverage, where we really were in a position to figure out what you folks could do and then do it in relatively short order. And that's why we did it. I have not been able to advance that discussion. Just it's a matter of time on my element. But I am, suggesting that I think there's real opportunity here, and this should be the number 2 step that the committee pursues. And I'm willing to volunteer to help you with that. I think I'm in a kind of an unusual position. I sort of feel like a little bit like a carbureted engine mechanic. So from the dairy compact to MILC was a carbureted engine, and now we're talking DMC, and dairy revenue protection is a little bit more like fuel injection. So a little bit of a challenge for me as a mechanic, but I'm still there. I think my knowledge base is of some real value here. So I'll volunteer my time and effort to help the committee work through the issues here. As best, there's,
Did you say that program runs through the Farm Credit Association?
yes.
And so I wonder why they wouldn't be promoting that to their farmers that we already have that program not in running. Why wouldn't they be promoting that more, Dan?
Yeah, I'm not sure it's a question of just promotion, Bobby. I don't really have an answer to your question. I don't really know what Farm Credit does in terms of promotion. The discussion that I had with the staff person in Farm Credit who administers the program for the Northeast seemed to indicate that there was more reliance on UVM to do the education and information. So, that's one question to ask, is how is the information about the program disseminated?
Wasn't that guy out of Connecticut or someplace way off?
I think he's out of the Albany office. Yeah, they're involved in in the merger of Yankee and Northeast, so that's changing now too.
So is there some way that you could dig deeper into this to tell us how it operates, and so we would know what we as a state could do to take advantage of that?
Yeah, I think what I would need on my end is some direction from the committee. Number one, that you want me to play some role in this, and number two, that you'd like me to take sort of the next step with with farm credit beyond what we did with the task force on behalf of your committee. And then I can structure next steps for the committee if that's your pleasure. And I'll communicate with, he's a terrific guy. I'll talk to him and we can work it out. I think he's more than willing to do this. If
Yeah,
that's
and
your pleasure.
Maine is in the same position that we're in, small farms, and I bet New Hampshire as well, right?
Absolutely. And it appeared that there was more participation, at least in New York, than there is in Vermont. That seemed to be the indication. The other New England states, not sure about so much.
Yeah.
Vermont
Brian?
does seem to be an outlier in not participating in this program, and I don't have an answer as to why. But I am happy to take this to the next level if you'd like.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd be interested, Dan, in at least seeing the details. I'm trying to wrap my head around what it is. What we're talking about is, in essence, an insurance program that a farmer right now could get involved with. And you're suggesting that the state might become a partner in that situation, I think. And that we're focused more on the revenue side of it than we are in the feed side of it, which I understand. And
But I left out a key piece, and I apologize, and thanks for the question, which is that instead of tying it to the feed margin, as you said, what you can do is tie your cost of production. You identify your cost of production, and then you can tie a hedge price to either the class 3 or the class 4 price, Brian, and you can actually structure a pay price for your farm that is reliable by hedging against the 3 and 4 price. So you use, say, the class 4 price as your indicator, and then you figure out what you need above where the class 4 price is, and then you pay a premium for that margin between the 4 and your optimal price, and it's a true hedge. And if the price goes above your number, then you don't see anything. But if it goes below your number, then you get a return from the government to make up the difference. So you actually have some reliability through this program as a pay price through your blend price, whatever, your mailbox price, plus this insurance as a hedge tied to an indicator in the milk business, either the 3 or the 4 price. It's a thoughtful program, clearly.
Is that part of the farm bill, or has that been in the farm bill right along, or do you know about that, Dane?
Yeah, so as I said before, revenue protection programs have been baked into farm bill policy for many years. And the dairy, if my recollection is correct, the dairy revenue, the dairy piece of the revenue protection program is either one or 2 or 3 farm bills old. So it's relatively new. But it is part of the farm bill and will be up for reauthorization in the next farm bill next year.
So it looks like it's gained its place in the farm bill, so it isn't like we're chasing a horse that's going to be dead in a year. It's got a track record of surviving the farm bill, so it'll probably continue.
Yes, absolutely, and absolutely, period. And then along those lines, the reason I did a little history with MILC to the dairy margin coverage is to say that we now have a track record with the relative cost for farms that are for states that have structure to include smaller farms in addition to developing bigger farms, which would be the Northeast states, Vermont, Pennsylvania, New York, and Wisconsin. Where you have a base of smaller farms what these programs cost to the federal government. So I think we're in a position to potentially increase the participation in Vermont in the existing program, and then based on that, maybe calibrate the program at a better level to our configuration in the upcoming farm bill. So there's quite a bit of opportunity here, and unlike to Brian's point, this isn't one time. Both your and Brian's point, this is money that's in the farm bill. This isn't one time, one-off money. This is operating programs.
And there's nothing that would prevent a farmer from being in DMC and this, right?
That's correct. Yes. That's correct.
And
Great question. And the answer is yes.
I think that be worth pursuing.
Me too.
So what would you need from us, Dan, to help you open the door to proceed to looking into this issue?
I guess if some sort of informal, but still, I don't know, a vote or just a sense of the committee that you would like me to go ahead and talk to the fellow from Farm Credit, some statement of direction to me that I can point to when I talk to Jeremy and his principals, that I'm not just doing this on my own, but I'm doing it at your it's really, it has been the task force. So now we're really on behalf of this committee, I guess, is to formalize that to some extent, not really formal, obviously, but just some statement of the committee that I can point to.
So it'll give you, just giving you permission on our behalf to proceed with looking into it.
Correct.
Yep, okay. We'll talk about that and yeah. What's number 3?
I would say number 3 would be the labor issue. We in the task force kind of summation, as you talked about before, Bobby, we spent a fair amount of time talking about the issue of CDLs. Mike, Representative Marcotte really was very helpful in making us all aware that the issue of labor is not just an agricultural issue, and that housing is in the middle of that. And then as this summation also discussed, we spent some time talking about apprenticeship programs. So I think we're sort of in trying to figure out where your committee might go. We're kind of similar situation with transportation, that to delve into CDLs, you can delve into that and go along, spend a lot of time, but like you said, it's federal issue, hard to get to. The question of incentives and housing's more in Mike's committee. I think apprenticeship programs, clearly something you folks should spend some time on, that the issue of labor on farm, we need some more formalities out of the state in terms of apprenticeship training. So I would highlight that, number 1. But then I would suggest also that you ought to dig into the issue, kind of next step from what the task force did, which is that the where we are, I think, on the labor issue, we heard a lot of testimony that labor is the labor challenge is really starting to be a front and center problem on farms. That'll, similar to if you can't get your milk off the farm, you can't get paid. And if you don't have enough help on the farm, you can't operate the farm. And it's becoming, it's always been a chronic problem, but now it's becoming a pressing problem. And I would recommend that you spend some time, take some testimony, hear from some farms. There's like different categories. There's the larger farm issues that have, labor force on the farm problems. And that gets into the question of immigrant labor as compared to domestic labor. But on the smaller farms, not so much the immigrant labor issue, although that is there. But it's also, you have the husband and wife are the only two workers on the farm. And so one of the spouses is working off the farm, and that's putting pressure on. There's really only one person that can run the farm. If something happens to that person, they got a problem. So that's one dynamic. Then there may be a child or a grandchild or another relative that wants to work on the farm. And I hear this all the time now. I'm 20 years old, or I'm in high school, and I'm facing the choice of helping out on the farm and getting paid $8 or $10 an hour, and I can go flip burgers at McDonald's and make $22. So it's become a difficult choice. I think I've indicated to a few of you, I've for a long time been working with the Maine Dairy Industry Association, which is a statutory created, basically a trade group, but it's created by the legislature for all the dairy farms in the state. So conventional, organic, independent, and cooperative. So all the farms are represented by this group. We came up with a proposal for a congressionally directed spending request of Congress, which translates to an earmark, to look into just this issue. And Senator Collins and Senator King both authorized it. So in the current federal budget for this fiscal year, which is still hasn't been passed, there's an earmark for a $600,000 program to address this. So I would suggest that Vermont wants to take some kind of similar step to look at it's I think a manageable issue of farm labor, smaller farms, 2, 3, 4, 5 people operation. What might the state be able to do to assist with that dynamic? And I would expect that there should be federal money in the pandemic response available. And we might be getting late for that. I don't know. And whether the other tranche of money less, that's real infrastructure money. I don't know. But whether there's one-time funding available that might be able to seed a program for this. So it's kind of a suggestion, approach it. Apprenticeship is new workers. And then how can you maintain existing workers? How might you be able to incentivize and help where there's a neighbor or a son or daughter or a nephew or niece or a grandchild? I've heard often, it skips a generation, there's a grandchild really has farming in the blood and would like to stay on the farm, but there's just not enough availability to do that. So those are my two suggestions on the labor side that the committee might think about as item number 3 on the list.
Yeah, that, under E there, Mike was going to take care of that commercial driver license stuff in commerce, I think, make sure that there was help there for that. Gus has put somewhere between $3 and $10 million into farm labor housing that we got done last year, but it's going to start this spring through Champlain Housing, I believe. And so the apprenticeship program would be something new that we could work on, right, Brian?
Yeah, and I got a suggestion for that. I don't know if it'll work or not, but the Stafford Technical Center in Rutland has a CDL program. From what I understand, if you go through the program, you get your license, and they're driving fairly big rigs on the road with the student at the wheel and the teacher right next to him or her. And so that provides a little bit of apprentice, but I think they have a pretty good track record too of getting jobs for people once they're done with the program so that they could drive for whoever else, Casella or one of the other trucking companies, so they get some practice. And then to Bobby's point earlier, eventually maybe they become milk haulers. So there's I think there's 12 tech centers around the state. I could be off by one or two, but it seems like that might be a place to start looking for apprentice help.
There.
Yeah.
Sounds like a great idea. Great idea.
And then the apprentice program to work on the farm, to do that, to compensate some on the pay. And so are we down to F now, Dan?
Well, I really H, I think, on my list. Sort of next item, so we don't, take on too much, at least for next steps. This one is similar to, I'm at least sort of in the same bailiwick with labor is Vermont has over the years established a number of business assistance programs, and the task force indicated that some tightening up of those programs might be helpful. So this one I don't think is kind of a new deal. It's kind of looking at what's the different the agency and the housing conservation folks are doing for business planning, and whether those programs can be improved, number one, and number two, whether there's some federal funding available in the two federal bills that might augment the current financing for those programs. So that one's kind of a pretty focused, which I think leaves the last item on my list anyway, Senator Brock's fee on retail sales. Before we get to that, I just suggest that the task force really got created to look into the milk price, regulated milk price, and we're working on that. So number 3 and 4, I'm at the direction of the task force. I'm involved in working with a law professor to get the legal opinions that we requested to get, and I'm pretty far along, and hopefully I'll have something on those in the next week or two. I think I'm really to that point, close enough that I can hopefully make that representation to you folks, that I'll be back to you as to where we are next step on the the real milk price, as opposed to Senator Brock's is really this add-on. So here, Bobby, your point, I'm totally appreciative of what you're saying with inflation and food prices in just it's really 4 months since Senator Brock put this on the table, and the world is kind of tipped a little bit. It looks very different. But I think in response to the question you asked about Walmart, I would point to what Maine did. Their fee is on the first point of contact for milk that's sold in the state. So I think you could structure that in Vermont similarly, and it wouldn't be that hard to do. You just identify where the point of sale, initial point of contact, where the milk is handled, that's going into the packaged milk product, wherever that is, and that's where you could impose the assessment.
And that would work even though the first point of contact could be out of state?
No, it's the first point of contact in state. Whoever the initial in-state handler is for the in-state sale, that's all you're talking about. In-state handling, in-state sale, that's it.
Yeah. But that, once you get that legal opinion, once we do that with the task force, that's going take quite a lot more review and action, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. You know, that's the bigger picture. This one is just, so if Vermont produces 2.5 billion pounds, roughly 2.5 billion pounds of milk total, the in-state sale has always been projected to be 10%, you know, give or take. So that's 250 million pounds of milk. So you're really looking for the in-state handling for that 250 million pounds. What we're looking at on the other is the percentage of milk that's used for processing and manufacturing in state without regard to where the finished products go out of state.
Yeah.
And that's more 2 billion pounds of the 2.5, you know, give or take. So two completely different assessments.
I don't know if the committee, we ever talked about that.
No, I don't think so. If you put a nickel on a gallon, the consumer's gonna notice, and in a way, you're sort of just, I don't wanna say hoodwinking, but you're hiding the fee and the tax that you put on it. So this one is a little bit more of a struggle for me.
Also, I don't know whether you're putting extra money, raising the price in order to do advertising. I'm not so sure that advertising is gonna convince me to buy more milk or cheese. I mean, people buy milk based on how many people live in the house, you know. I just don't think, I wonder about whether that's a good investment. Not saying to put it in the first contact, that piece, I like talking about that.
But they're gonna just pass it along.
Right.
The other way, you know, there's always more than one way to skin a cat.
I've heard that.
I think. Farmers are already paying 15 cents, I believe it is, a hundredweight for advertising right out of their milk check.
Right.
Well, a percentage of that goes to southern New England, and a percentage of it stays across the street in the ag agency. And we could maybe spend a little time sorting that out to see how much advertising they're doing with that money they retain to help bolster ag sales. But Dan, did you want to give us a little overview of how that milk used to be, you know, 10-15% stayed home and 85% or so went to Southern, and how that has changed?
Sure. Before we turn to that, I would just, you know, for your thinking and Anthony, I just suggest that we heard testimony on advertising, how the money is being spent, the money that Bobby's talking about. And that one of the things that was quite striking is that there are new products, new fluid milk products in development, and whether consumers are really fully aware of the availability of these new products. Number one, I'm not sure that the advertising has been effective in that regard. And I would suggest you might want to look into that, number one. And number two, the Vermont branding for new products is I think it's some opportunity for increased sales of Vermont products that hasn't been explored. So I'm not really an advertising guy myself, but I wouldn't give up on it totally.
Mr. Chair,
Yeah.
could I ask a question? This is, you'll recall, I think we looked at something similar a few years ago when we were trying to sort out a solution for some water quality funding, and wondered about putting it on the producer level at some kind of very small fee, but with the volume moving through would have been significant. And the pushback that I recall, one of the pushbacks was, you know, that basically a lot of the people you'd be assessing a fee on are the co-ops. And so you're basically taxing the farmer because they, in theory, own the co-ops. And I'm just curious, Dan, if what you would say to that. I mean, I'm open to the idea, and I think it's an intriguing one. It's always challenging to figure out who's making money in the dairy world, and we know it's not farmers, but everybody will sort of say that they're all struggling, and it's very difficult to pin that down. But what would you say to the notion that, well, here you are claiming you want to help farmers, but you're just assessing us at a different level of our business because we are the co-op owners, and you're ending up hurting us as you're trying to help us.
So are you talking about the sort of the larger scale price regulation or the nickel potential?
Talking about the nickel,
Yeah.
nickel.
Yeah, I think that's a fair challenge in your the state is kind of imposing on co-ops. We think you should have your members pay a nickel, whatever that translates to improve advertising for the product, and that's really potentially a business decision that the co-op should be making, number one. And number two, they're already paying this is what amounts to 15 cents a hundredweight already for the purpose. So I think that's a fair challenge. So I'll speak to Bobby's the bigger question. And Chris, you and I talked about this, the amount of milk that's actually involved with the over time, and we have real numbers on this now, that from the market administrator's office, the volume of milk that to Bobby's point, until relatively recently, 10, 15, 20 years, the broad majority of milk production, raw milk production, Vermont raw milk production, went out of state to Boston. That was the historic configuration of the Vermont dairy industry, was to be the anchor raw milk supply to the Boston fluid milk plants, Hood, Gorelick. The farm was assembled, St. Albans, Agrimark, NFO, all kinds of co-ops and bargaining agencies assembled milk from farms in Vermont and trucked it down to, or in railroad down to Boston. And along really comes Ben & Jerry's and then Cabot, and have built up a manufacturing base in the state that has completely displaced and transformed that historic configuration. So in upwards of 90% of the milk at the heyday went out of state, and most of it went to the fluid milk plants, and then the remainder went to the powder plant in West Springfield, which was a balancing plant. So in the spring, a lot more milk is produced, spring flush, and in the fall, a lot, and in summer, less was consumed because of schools were out of session. So there were times when there was greater milk production than there was need for the fluid plants. So the surplus, the excess, went to the balancing plant in West Springfield. And in combination, 90% of the milk production went out of state. So now something on the order of 65% of the milk is staying in state. So that's a tremendous change. And the 65% in state is documented by the market administrator. That's the pool volume. So the pool plants, the Cabot plant, the Ben & Jerry's plant, the Booth Brothers plant, the Commonwealth yogurt plant, those are pool plants in the federal order system. So the volume of milk that they use is tracked and audited. And the market administrator's office economist came in and testified that 65% of that milk production in Vermont stays in state. So major change there. The other piece is of the milk that's being processed and manufactured in state, how much of it's actually coming in from out of state. And this number, when I made my presentation to you, Chris, back in the day, I didn't have this number. We now have that number. And Bobby and I, we go back and forth, and I think both of us were pretty surprised. Substantially less milk is coming into Vermont now from New York than we thought. And the pool number is only 15%. So that's a low number, really. So we have a fairly self-contained raw volume supply manufacturing and processing industry in the state. And it's on the order of 2 billion pounds of milk. So it's not an insignificant volume of milk at 2 billion pounds. So Vermont has quite a vital processing and manufacturing industry that's developed over time. And so that's the task force took in that information, received that information to really formalize our understanding of the industry. And I think that that's a significant finding of the task force. The industry hasn't been looked at that way in a comprehensive way, really ever, in terms of its manufacture and processing. So that's the big change. And what it raises is the question that I put before you early on, which is, if that is the case, then it changes the regulatory jurisdiction of the state. When the milk went out of state to Boston, you're in basic interstate commerce. The milk is being produced in one state and being used in another state, and neither of those states really have much regulatory oversight over the transaction, because in our case, the point of sale for the milk is in Boston. So Vermont had no authority over that point of sale. Massachusetts tried to finesse the fact that the milk was produced in Vermont, that they were regulating, and ran into interstate commerce at the Supreme Court and lost, and hence the compact. But those days are over for Vermont. The milk is being produced and used in state. The new legal wrinkle is that even though the raw milk is being used and processed in state, the finished products are being sold out of state. So there is still interstate commerce involved, but it's with the finished products. So that's what we're looking for in B3 and 4, is some legal information about the consequence of that. And I'm pretty far along in that process. So that's kind of where we are to date, Bobby.
Yeah, well, Dan, isn't it true that we also found out that if we only produce 2.5, 2.6 billion in total, right?
Yes.
So if we're using 2 billion pounds already right here at home, that means we only have like 600 million pounds that we can ship out of state. If we had another major manufacturer come along and build something here at home, we would be lucky to have enough milk to supply it. And that's why we can't as a state afford to keep losing farms, because I mean, one factory could use that much milk. Do you have any idea how much milk like Cabot uses in 1 year to make cheese out of, Dan?
So I would just, echo your point, Bobby, that I think that the understanding, sort of common understanding, is that Vermont could really benefit from the establishment of some larger scale new commercial dairy manufacturing plant And I think what we found in the task force, for the reasons you said, is that's probably not the case, that milk production has stayed pretty constant, 2, 4, 5, 6, 7 billion pounds over the last 20 years. And it doesn't seem that there's really much increased productive capacity. Yeah, I mean, cow comfort's been increased, genetics, feeding, but the land base does not appear that it could support much more volume of milk. So we already have high-end use of that milk, Ben & Jerry's, Cabot, Booth, Commonwealth as a base. So, I think your point is very important, that there's really only this 600 million pounds of milk going out of state. And some of that's going to fluid plants. So we're using, the state is using its milk supply in a high-end way. And so absolutely, to your second point, that if Vermont continues to lose farms, and if it consolidates, then you're going to have a different configuration. If it continues to consolidate and you still produce the same volume of milk, the concern you raise is less problematic. But that isn't necessarily, can the infrastructure support only a series of large-scale farms in the state? That's an open-ended question, whether that's supportable. And really, to your point, whether Ben & Jerry's or Cabot is going to stick around to find out the answer to that question, I don't think is a given. I just don't think it's a given that they will. Cabot, certainly more likely than Ben & Jerry's, since Cabot is owned by the co-op. But I think that is the larger economic development question for the state, beyond just the farm viability question. And it's a fundamental issue that you raise.
Yeah, I don't know.
Sorry, in answer to your question, we did receive testimony from Agrimark that the 2 Cabot plants utilize on the order of 1 billion to 1.2 billion pounds of milk in their plants when they're at capacity.
Yeah, and I'm sure DFA up in St. Albans is in basically the same boat, supplying, Ben & Jerry's and the cheese plant and Enosburg. And so I don't know if our colleagues understand the whole story about how it's so important to maintain these farms. There's all these businesses that employ thousands of people, statewide.
Yeah, our industrial park in St. Albans is Ben & Jerry's and Barry Calvo chocolate. There's a few other places, but those are the big ones.
Yeah, employ hundreds of people, and I don't know if they understand that 25 years ago, 30, when we did the compact, it worked ideal because our milk was going to southern New England, and we recaptured some of that money. Nowadays, the product's being used here, and for some reason it hasn't trickled down to the farm. But anyways.
But I think that the other piece of the puzzle is if there is a continued degrading of Vermont, could Ben & Jerry's through St. Albans, or could Cabot through Agrimark bring in milk from New York State? And that really does not seem to be as viable an alternative as one might think. And I think the fact that only 15% of the milk is coming in from out of state right now is a very important piece of the evidence that when you think about trying to bring the milk here, Lake Champlain is right smack in the way of everything. And as the farms have diminished in New York State, the milk is moving farther west. So there's far less capability for Agrimark or DFA to bring milk into Vermont. So, Vermont really will do well to hold on to its farms.
Yeah.
But they got, Agrimark's got, they have a cheese plant in Chattagay, and they've got a few
Yeah.
through northern New York, so they're using up their milk in their facilities.
So anything else, Dan, for this morning?
That was my list, and
You're sticking to it, huh?
But I do think there are, in that conversation, we have a baby food factory in Georgia, Vermont.
Georgia?
Yeah, and I was there a couple years ago touring it with the governor, and they're doing a pretty large expansion, but they're not using Vermont milk. They're bringing, I think their powder and everything they're doing is from elsewhere, so there might be an opportunity to engage them and see.
They aren't buying it from St. Albans
No,
next door?
no, it's Parago. No, I don't believe so. I can confirm it, but that's an opportunity. I mean, they did a couple $100 million expansion in Georgia in the last couple of years. It all was right around COVID, but there's opportunity for markets as well.
Did you heard that, Dan?
I had not heard that. So they're sourcing direct from out of state?
I don't know who they're sourcing from, but it wasn't St. Albans, and when we toured it a number of years ago, but it's Parago or Nutritional in Georgia, but it may be worth just looking into that and seeing, what's hanging that up, because that's a good sized facility.
Yeah.
In Franklin County, in addition to the other ones we have.
So we got trucks hauling theirs in, and then other trucks hauling yours out of saying, oh, that's a good smart. That's a real good plan.
Didn't show up on Diane's list of plants that I'll go back and double check.
They're an Ohio company. I mean, they're a big employer in the Georgia Industrial Park. We competed against Ohio for the expansion of that facility. I know just the governor and I toured it. My first year in the Senate, so just 3 years ago, and when they were talking about it. But Representative Rosenquist actually built that plant years ago in his private sector career.
Yeah.
And
So it'd just be worth looking into, because it might just not be one we're engaging enough with to see how we might be able to fill that need for them.
they're using raw milk as a source product, or are they using
I don't know if they're using powder or raw. They might just be using the powder, because I mean, it's
powder?
baby
That would
formula.
make sense. Yeah.
But is there a way that, that we can provide that? for
Probably it's coming from overseas for free.
Yeah.
Well, Dan, we'll talk that over in regards to getting you a letter, and then next day or two, we'll get that to you.
Okay. Sounds like a plan.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for all the info.
Yeah, thanks a lot. It's a lot of stuff going on there.
Yeah.
I'm gonna,
And
let me get,
we'll,
I was trying to get back to my birds. There I am. I'm over here. From my bird's eye perspective, thanks a lot for your time.
yeah. We'll see you later. See you
Great to see
tomorrow.
you. Great to see you in the State House. That's terrific. Welcome back.
Well, I'll let you know if that's a good thing or bad here soon.
There we go.
Chris, are you
All right.
still there?
Bye-bye.
Yeah,
Bye.
take care, Dan. Are you with us, Chris, or are you not there? I guess, so is that something you'd wanna do with Dan, is to
Sure.
let him
Yeah,
pursue that?
Yeah, we're just asking them to get information. That's not a,
Yeah,
No,
and
definitely.
he
kind of like a
volunteered,
broker for the insurance company.
yeah. Did you wanna put a letter, or you already did? do that? Oh, Linda's right on the ball.
It sure is.
No, I think that would be most helpful. And how we find out about that crew that you're dealing with?
I'll reach out to them.
Huh?
I don't know who the general manager is anymore. They had someone there that left years ago, but I know some people work there. I'll just figure out.
What they're using for raw product, and
Yeah.
if it's liquid or,
I do think it's powder, but
yeah.
Well, then we'd have to find somebody to process the fluid into powder,
Oh,
right?
no, they do that right in St. Albans.
They do?
Alvin's does that.
Then there's no reason for them. Why, I don't understand why they're not, unless it's price.
It might be, but is there a way to incentivize?
Yeah.
The use of our milk for that? So we're not shipping our milk off to.
Yeah.
Okay, Dan's, it's to whom it may concern. Dan Smith is working on behalf of the Vermont Senate Ag Committee on issues the committee is considering from recommendations of the task force to revitalize the Vermont dairy industry. The committee requests that you consider Dan Smith a representative of the Vermont Senate Ag Committee and assist him as he gathers information for the committee.
Well, there's no flies on you, Linda. That's a pretty good letter.
Will you sign it
Is
now?
that,
That sounds good.
oh,
If you'll sign it, I'll scan it and send it to him.
okay. Anything, Chris?
No, good letter, Linda. Thanks.
You still got your cold?
Yeah, miserable.
Well, that empty seat here is bothering me.
Yeah, it's bothering me.
Well,
But
hopefully,
I expect I'll be there by the end of the week. We'll see.
yeah, well, better to stay away from us healthy ones. We don't need what you got.
That is true. This is more miserable than I would have thought.
So tomorrow we have Diane coming over to talk with us in regards to the Horizon Milk situation and to bring us up to speed on how that's going over there. And the other thing maybe we ought to ask Diane is how much product that, what's the name of that place up there?
Parago.
Paragon,
Or PMB, I think they go by now.
PMB?
Yeah.
How much product BMP is using at their plant in milk product? Are they using at their plant in Georgia?
PMB?
Yeah.
Anything else? Anything you want to get on the schedule, Chris? No? Well, I guess then we'll call it a day and see you in caucus or tomorrow